Hey everyone, welcome to the August 8th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we are looking back at last weekend's racing from around the country, though primarily focusing on the action at Saratoga. That's where most of the stakes racing took place, especially on Saturday. It was Whitney Day. That race produced a nice performance from the winner, Life is Good. We'll talk about that in a little more depth in just a bit, but 5 stakes in total on Whitney Day. We'll go through all of them, as well as some other nice performances from 2-year-olds, other stakes events earlier in the week and after on Sunday at Saratoga. And we'll finish things up by talking about a few graded stakes from elsewhere in the country, including the Clement Hirsch out at Del Mar, the West Virginia Derby at Mountaineer, and a stakes from Monmouth at the end of the show. But Craig, most of the eyes of the racing world are focused on Saratoga for Saturday and that Whitney card, and Life is Good just did not disappoint in the Whitney. He was the one that showed up.
He did not. I know we were both against him a little bit, but he's just so fast. He's really tough when he gets out on that clear lead, and they were unable to run him down. He ran a really nice speed figure in there, 136, I believe it was. I'm going off the top of my head today a little bit. But, yeah, it was just what we've learned to expect from him. I'll probably be foolish enough to try to beat him again in the future, particularly when he goes 1.25 miles, but there's nothing to knock really from what we've seen from him so far. When he's able to get those clear leads, at least in this country, it's pretty much lights out.
Yeah, Craig and I are recording this one day earlier than usual on Monday, so apologies if not all the speed figs are quite set yet, or if we're a little bit looser than usual, but we're doing these races pretty fresh off the weekend. And yeah, Craig, I agree with what you said. I mean, he's the one that showed up. His main rival, Olympiad, for whatever reason, just did not run his race on this day, clearly did not replicate that Stephen Foster performance, and the race did become easier for Life is Good once it became clear that Olympiad was not really engaged in the same way that he usually is. He kind of was dropping out on the far turn, but you got to give credit where credit is due, and Life is Good just is a horse that basically shows up and runs his race every single time they lead him over there, and he used that ample speed that he possesses on the backstretch as opposed to into that clubhouse turn. He really opened up through a much quicker second quarter mile. You can kind of see it in the TimeformUS pace figures, running a 150 to the half mile, which is pretty fast for any horse, but especially going the 1 1/8 distance. And he just is able to sustain that speed going the 1 1/8. Did not like some of the antics we see from Irad Ortiz in the stretch, veering over to cut off his uncoupled stablemate Happy Saver in the late stages. Life is Good was going to win this race anyway, but that kind of stuff, it's just unnecessary.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. Until the stewards do something, I guess it's just not going to change. Irad Ortiz did get that big 30-day suspension back at the end of last year for a couple of incidents. But it almost seems to me like now the stewards are afraid because they would have to escalate things, I guess, over and above what he got before. So it seems like he pretty much can do whatever he wants. And you can't really blame John Velasquez because he was almost put over the rail by Irad Ortiz back in June, and we never heard a peep about it. There was no suspension. It wouldn't have been a DQ because Johnny Velasquez won the race anyway. But I just don't know what else to say about it. I mean, Irad is a competitor. We'll give him that. But I do think he just goes way too far sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, when you're watching the replay, it's a little tough to tell on the pan, but it did seem like Life is Good was about a length and a half clear of Happy Saver when he moved over into that path. So I don't think there was really that risk of him clipping heels or anything like that, but it was close, and Irad is the kind of jock that cuts it pretty close at times. To me, it was just totally unnecessary. I mean, it was so clear that he looked over his left shoulder, saw a rival coming, and just made that swerve to cut him off. You're on the best horse. Why are you even bothering to do that? I mean, it didn't make any sense to me. It's a bad look, and you wish that he'd be able to resist the temptation to kind of take those edges when you're on the best horse anyway. You don't have to do that. So disappointing to see that, but that shouldn't take away too much from the performance Life is Good put in. Craig, we did get a question on Twitter. Was this a difficult speed figure to make? Because I believe it was the only 2-turn dirt race of the day, and it did come up fairly fast. I think the 136 is the highest number Life is Good has ever received. I know some people weren't necessarily thinking this was his best performance, so was it a difficult call at all, or it just seemed like a day that you could play pretty straight?
I mean, he's run very similar in the past, a lot of mid 130 figures, but maybe this was the highest or so by a point. I'm going to do something I normally wouldn't do and pull the worksheet up right now. I don't remember anything being too particularly. No, despite the weather, looking at it, looking down the one column, the day stayed, despite the weather and the rain and the wet track, it very little speed changing. So for me, it was an easy speed figure day. No question about it. Didn't look like anything different between the fast track and the good track from race to race. Even the ninth race just before it used a very similar variant. So nothing out of the ordinary.
Yeah, there were a bunch of 7 furlong races on this card. I think 4 or 5 of them in total. So, I mean, those were easy to compare, I'm sure. But, I mean, yeah, there was some weather that took place in the middle of the day at Saratoga on Saturday. We'll talk about that with when we get to the test for them sealing the track. Obviously not ideal to run some major stakes races over a sealed racetrack, but sometimes that rain is unavoidable in Saratoga. And yeah, let's move on to some of those other Grade 1 races from Saturday at Saratoga. The test was won by big long shot Chi-Town Lady, as Matarea just either didn't seem to handle the track or was on the wrong part of the track, or maybe just didn't show up with her best effort. But she didn't run here, and it opened the race up to some horses that probably are not going to be winning Grade 1s anytime soon.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, Hot Peppers went out and set a really fast pace again, just like last time, but wasn't able to quite hold off Chi-Town Lady. Chi-Town Lady only got a 106 speed figure. It's probably the lowest test I've ever made. I'd have to look it up, to be honest, but I can't think of one that would be anywhere near that. And to show how fast the pace was to set up her late run, the runner-up Hot Peppers is getting a 115, a full 9 points higher. I'm not sure what happened with Monterey. I guess you could argue a lot of people did that maybe she would have been second without some contact that we saw. I don't think so. I think the stewards made the right call personally. I don't think any positions were going to change with or without the contact. It does bring up an interesting point and something I guess I want to address briefly, and that is what happened to the head on camera? Because I know you pointed it out. I saw Pat Cummings pointing it out. And those were not the normal views we're used to looking to. And frankly, they weren't very good. We didn't get to see a view of the Whitney Stakes. We did get to see one of the tests, and I think it was a bit deceiving and also not the clearest view. And like I said, I still personally don't think there should have been a change. But when something major like that's going to come down to adjudicating fouls is not functioning, it seems like the public should know it.
Yeah, that was a real problem for me. If you want to check out my tweet about it, you can look at the side by sides that I posted from that race. I think I put that up right after the race on Saturday. But the normal head on camera is straight down the rail in the stretch. I mean, it's a perfect view for the stewards to see if horses are going in or out. The head-on in quotation marks that they were using on Saturday, it was not the normal view. I don't know why that is. I know these races were being broadcast on Fox as well as NBC that day, so maybe they had to move some things around, get some different camera crews in, and that caused them not to be able to use their normal camera position. I don't know. But the head-on view that they were using, that it seemed even the stewards were basing their decision on, was not a head-on angle. It was actually a little bit to the right, so it made it seem like Chi-Town Lady was coming in more than she actually was, because by the time that they were, those horses were veering late and deep stretch, you're almost kind of at like maybe a 40-degree angle looking at them. It was not head-on, so that's I think it confused the public, and it made some people incensed that Chi-Town Lady was not disqualified, because a lot of people aren't that good at judging those angles when they don't have that perfect camera angle to be able to see who's moving in or out. To my eye, it seemed like Hot Peppers was the one that was veering out a lot more than Chi-Town Lady was coming in. Chi-Town Lady definitely did come in a step to bump those two horses, but I think it was a combination of factors. It wasn't just her, or even mostly her, so I think it would have been ridiculous to disqualify the winner. There is an argument that maybe Hot Pepper should have come down and been placed third, but Monterey was never winning this race, Craig, bumping aside. She was just never getting past Hot Peppers. Hot Peppers ran the best race after setting that fast pace, but I don't want to give her too much credit because, as you were saying, this was just not the greatest test field that we're ever going to see.
No, I think the only thing I learned, I know with Hot Peppers, there was some question about her victory ride and how good a race that really was. But I think it was actually decent. Maybe she's a horse that seven's just too far. She did face some pressure from Wishing You Well, but not enough to. She just basically kind of stopped. So the only other thing, I kind of lost her for a minute there with the connection, but no need to go back. But the head on was also too low. It's something we usually get a much higher angle. I'm not sure if you addressed that. And it was just a totally different perspective. So hopefully by the time we get back to racing on Wednesday, we'll be back to the normal view.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, it was also at a much lower vantage point, which makes it difficult to see. It's just not ideal, and the stewards should not have had to base their opinions on that camera angle. But we can move on to some other races. The last grade one that they ran on that Saturday card was the Saratoga Derby Invitational, a relatively new race as part of that Turf Triple Series at NYRA. And wow, Craig, they've run a couple of these now, or I should say they've run 4 of these Turf Triple races, 2 for the fillies, 2 for the colts, and 2 of them, or 50% of them, have been timed incorrectly. It's kind of an issue. The Belmont Oaks, obviously, they think they timed at the wrong rail setting, and I don't know what the story is with the Saratoga Derby, but the times were all wonky when they were posted. The hand time that got made official afterwards also seemed wrong, but luckily I think you were saying the Trackus seemed like it was correct. And it feels like, based on that Trackus time, it was a relatively fast race, and Nation's Pride, the winner, put in a nice effort.
He did, and I'm not sure what went on with the timing for this race. Another race we're going to talk about later that was mistimed is a different story, but this one I have no idea. I was able to time it from video. It was very close to the Trackus time, so that one does seem to be fine. And it was a pretty quick race by Nation's Pride, no doubt. He wound up with a 120 speed figure in here, which is really good for a 3-year-old this early in the season. I would imagine it's the highest Saratoga Derby we've ever had. It might even be the highest of all the triple turf races we've seen since they've been been running, which is only, as you said, I think about 4 years. Strong effort from him, and Charlie Appleby just continues to tick off wins. We'll talk about both of them that he swept this week, but his horses are impressive. When he comes here, you absolutely have to take them seriously. Nation's Pride was able to show that trip kind of did hold him back in the Belmont Derby because he was explosive here. And what I like from him is the tactical speed that he was able to show this time. Something which has been a treat a lot of these Charlie Appleby shippers that come in. A lot of times Europeans get pegged with this, oh, they're all plotters, all the races are slow over there, but these horses have been able to get good early position.
Yeah, and you also wonder with both of these Charlie Appleby runners, Nation's Pride, the winner of the Saratoga Derby, and With the Moonlight, who we'll talk about in just a second, who won the Saratoga Oaks on Sunday, they stayed in Saratoga, basically in New York, for the entire time since the Belmont Derby and Oaks, and you wonder how much that benefited them, being able to have a longer time to acclimate to U.S. racing and the type of trading they do over here, the routine, because even though both of those horses had mild trips at Belmont, obviously Nation's Pride to a much greater extent, it seemed like they both took steps forward to win their respective races, and as you said, that 120 TimeformUS Speed Figure that Nation's Pride received for the Saratoga Derby victory, I mean, that puts him in the conversation towards a race like the Breeders' Cup Turf later in the year. I mean, they obviously won that race with Yabir last year, and I see no reason why Nation's Pride couldn't be on a similar path based on the improvement that he showed here. And yeah, I mean, just kind of shows how beneficial it can be to watch those trips, because he definitely was the one that seemed like he got the worst of it in the Belmont Derby, and he was able to get a much more favorable setup here to win the race. I thought that Annapolis ran fine to be second in the Saratoga Derby, Craig. It felt to me like maybe a horse that didn't quite get the trip because, and when I say trip, I mean distance, because he was traveling like a winner around the far turn. It looked like Irad Ortiz had made all the right moves, saving ground, and when he peeled him out into the clear at the top of the stretch, he just didn't quite have the late kick that we had grown accustomed to seeing from him in the shorter races.
Yeah, I would agree. He did flatten out a little, and that was my one concern when we talked about this race for Annapolis. He's obviously talented. He got a 116 speed figure. Thought he ran very well, just not quite as good as Nation's Pride. Maybe couldn't quite handle the mile and 3/16ths, or maybe it'll just take a little time and he'll be more fit for it next time if he gives it a shot when I don't know what distance they're going to run now that they're not going back to Belmont. They're going back to Aqueduct, but it will be a longer one. And I wouldn't totally write him off. Maybe with experience, he'd get better. And I did want to mention Classic Causeway as well. I think he showed that his Belmont Derby was no fluke. He ran just fine in here. He kind of dismissed the notion that had Emmanuel not been scratched that day, things would have been a little tougher, as that one was a complete non-factor early and late. And I thought he ran really good to be third, beating less than 2 lengths. He actually got a 119 speed figure. So he's a pretty versatile colt that can run on both surfaces, as we've now seen.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to serve as the perfect prep for the Arc de Triomphe, like Ken McPeak has mentioned it might. But he did run well, and he's definitely taken a step forward since the switch back to turf and proved that, as you were alluding to, that Belmont Derby was no fluke. While we're talking about these 3-year-olds on the turf, let's move on over to Sunday and discuss the Saratoga Oaks. This one, again, a newer race, so it's just a grade 3 that'll probably get upgraded in future years, though not if they keep drawing 5-horse fields, I suppose. But again, Charlie Appleby got the job done here with the Moonlight, the second place finisher for the Belmont Oaks, who was able to go one better and turn the tables on McCulloch.
Yeah, it was a pretty impressive effort, I thought, especially for turning the tables. It was a race that at Belmont, these fillies have run much faster than the Colts on the same day. And I thought they didn't quite run as fast as them this time. A 117 speed figure for With the Moonlight. But I thought she was impressive. I mean, not that there were team tactics, I'm not saying that, but she had to beat 3 of 5 Chad Brown horses in this field, and they were a pretty versatile lot. But once again, she was able to use her tactical speed, get good position, and she just really finished off the race in fast time. I thought it was a good effort. She did seem to enjoy the extra distance, and the pace, we don't have it quite in blue. The speed figures and pace figures gradually increase throughout the race, but I do get the feeling this was more of a slow pace flow than the numbers would indicate.
Yeah, I got that same sense watching it. It seemed like they were really crawling along in the early stages, and it visually turned into a sprint to the wire, and it just seemed as simple as With the Moonlight got the jump on the other closers, McCulloch and New Year's Eve, though McCulloch didn't really pick up the same way that she did in the Belmont Oaks, and it's probably worth remembering that she got an absolutely perfect trip and ride from Irad Ortiz in that race, saving ground at Belmont on a rail that was arguably pretty good when they had taken the temporary rails down for that week, and With the Moonlight had not been on the inside for that race at Belmont, so maybe it's not a huge surprise that she was able to turn the tables here. The public obviously was not shocked because they bet her down to favoritism, maybe partly due to the fact that she had, very obviously outworked Nation's Pride in their team drill just prior to this race last week. So maybe a Nation's Pride victory kind of made people a little more confident about With the Moonlight's chances in this race, and that was certainly correct as she delivered a nice performance here and seems like one that's going to be tough if they keep around in this country for that Jockey Club Oaks coming up at the Belmont at Aqueduct meet. Let's go back to Saturday, Craig, and talk about the other graded stakes they ran on the turf that day. It was the Grade 2 Glens Falls for the fillies and mares going the 1.5-mile distance, and maybe the margin of victory was a little bit narrower than some people expected, but not a whole lot of drama when you watch this one. Warlike Goddess just looked like she was in command every step of the way.
Yes, her speed figure came back a 121. That's upgraded because the pace was slow. We have most of the fractions in blue, and I just thought she was a dominant winner. It's only a 2 point higher figure than the runner up Temple City Terror was able to get. And yeah, I'm not sure what. I know we talked about it on the forecast. She was. Her connections have been talking about maybe trying the males next time, and I would say why not? What else is there left to prove? I mean, you can always go back and run in the Philly and Mare Turf and the Breeders' Cup, but I don't see any reason she couldn't compete against the males. And I'd like to see her challenge because at this point she is just completely dominant in these long distance turf marathons.
Yeah, they had mentioned maybe targeting the sword dancer next before this race. I don't know if that's still the plan, but I know after this race they were being pretty explicit about the fact that their long term goal with her is the Breeders' Cup Turf against the males. They like that mile and a half distance for her much more than I think it would be mile and 3/16 this year at the Breeders' Cup at Keeneland. So she's a horse that I think. Has to be taken seriously based on the form that she's in if they try tougher company with her. That division doesn't usually come up that tough. I think it's always dependent on which Europeans come over, but she is a very talented mare. Before we move on from Saturday, let's just wrap up the one other stakes race they ran that day, a non-graded stakes, the Lure, earlier on the card. And boy, Craig, I've got to give some props to you. We didn't do this on the forecast, but we recorded a DRF video earlier in the week, which if you, I hope you found on DRF's YouTube channel before you bet this race. But Craig gave out the 23-1 winner Dynadrive as his top pick. I certainly didn't see it. I tried not to be too critical at the time because I knew this horse would be a big price. But nice call on this one, Craig.
Thanks. I mean, if anybody wants to see why I like the horse, you can always go back and check out the video. And actually had the exacta too. It was a rather big one. Funny story. I was actually grocery shopping with my wife at the time because the pick five was starting a little later. I did get my bets in early, and I didn't watch the race until later on. I actually got a text from a mutual friend of ours saying, "Oh, so you picked on a drive? Hats off!" So I immediately went and checked the results, and that was a good feeling to see. It was a heck of a ride by Eric Cancel. I have to give him credit for that. He just was able to save all the ground, sneak up the inside, get the head bob over shifting sands. So for me, this is the kind of race that kind of explains why I'm more a vertical player than a horizontal because when you're right, and you get paid. So it's just the way it works for me. And really nice job by Tom Morley as well. Don't want to give credit to the rider. Tom Morley has had this horse for two starts and has him in great form. So look forward to seeing what he can do moving forward. I would imagine they would try graded stakes. I'm not ready to say he's the kind of horse that can jump in and win grade ones. I don't think that, but he's been a really nice change to the barn there and profitable for sure.
Yeah, and Eric Cancel, I mean, a rider that I know I've been critical of at times, often on the biggest stages, doesn't quite step up to the plate with the rides that we sometimes see from him when the jockey colony is a little bit weaker during the wintertime. But on the biggest stages, at least in this race on Saturday, he certainly delivered. I mean, could not have given this horse a better trip, saving ground most of the way. Maybe for the best that you didn't see it live, Craig, because you might have been pulling your hair out as this horse was trying to come up the inside late. It kind of came up down to a head bob at the end, but he got him up right at the wire. An exciting race to watch, and very similar to the ride that he gave this horse last time, just saving ground, waiting, and then producing him when the hole opened up in the stretch. That's the way that you have to ride the turf. The way you don't want to ride the turf is the kind of ride that Irad Ortiz gave Some Like It Hot Brown in this race. I don't know what that was, Craig, but I mean, his chances were cooked after a half mile.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much was horse and how much was the rider. I hope it wasn't the rider. And I know I've been getting a lot of flack on Twitter because you posted a thing about the jockey ROI versus their win percentage last week. And frankly, I don't think Irad's been riding very well. I know he is the leading rider, but the guy also rides in nearly every single race. He clearly wants to win the riding title, as opposed to some other riders here who sit out a few. And he's riding tons of favorites. And don't get me wrong, he's not a bad rider. I'm in no way trying to say that. He's one of the tops in the game, but I just don't think he's totally on his game right now. I've seen a lot of shaky rides from him, a lot of rides where he hasn't been very aggressive. So now's the time to go against him because the public's still betting him. And as last week alone, he returned, I think it was 54 cents on the dollar. So it won't last. We know Irad's going to ride well most of the time. He's going to win a lot of races, but it's not happening right now at Saratoga.
Yeah, with the IRAD situation, I think it's just expectations being out of step with reality. I mean, people, I guess because he's won the Eclipse Award a few times, people have this idea in his head that he is a significantly better rider than the other top jocks, top 5 or 6 jocks in the room. And that's just not the case. I mean, he's probably on par with them. Is he slightly better when he's really in the groove? Maybe. I mean, that's how he's winning these Eclipse Awards. I mean, he's just racking up a ton of victories and earnings. But he's also getting a lot of mounts, and that's why he's the leading rider right now, because he's gotten more opportunities than the rest. His win percentage is on par with maybe the average of the top 6. It's a little bit below some others. The ROI is not there, but it's because there's this perception that he's so much better than everybody else, when I don't think it's necessarily the case. So we'll see how things continue to play out throughout this meet. There are some jocks that have been having surprising success, like Javier Castellano. Maybe he'll start getting some more opportunities. Luis Saez has been riding very well, Joel Rosario. So I'm interested to see how this jockey's race plays out a little bit later in the meet, as maybe some things will get a little different with the opportunities. But I'll stop talking about this now because we're only 19 days in, and no, you don't care about the jockey race at all, Craig. Let's move on to another graded stakes from this past week at Saratoga. On Friday, they ran the Grade 3 Troy for the turf sprinters. A lot of discussion about this ride and trip, as we were just talking about Irad Ortiz, on Golden Pal, Craig. What did you see? Because clearly he just eked out this victory. Did you think this was rider error, or a horse just maybe not being as sharp as we're used to seeing him?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I thought I read somewhere maybe he was given instructions to try to rate him a little bit, which I don't understand at all. I mean, these are turf sprints. The turf sprint in the Breeders' Cup's going to be 5.5 furlongs. I have no idea why you'd want to rate the fastest turf horse on the planet. So if it wasn't the plan, it didn't look good to me. Maybe it's just going to take him a race to get back into shape after that disaster at Ascot, where they totally missed the break. There was some confusion there at the gate with Irad Ortiz and this horse. I actually thought he ran pretty well at Ascot. The fact he was able to make up all that ground and get abreast of the leaders before getting tired showed he's still pretty quick. So I don't really know what happened in this one. He's a horse who had run a 130 speed figure when he won the Shakertown. He only ran a 119 here. So whether it was planned or not, they need to find his speed again to make him the horse that we were all expecting.
Yeah, I mean, to my eye, he just didn't break that sharply. He's a horse that you're accustomed to seeing leave the gate, and within 4 or 5 strides, he's a length or 2 ahead of the rest of his rivals. I mean, that's always been his biggest edge, is that he can get in front of these horses early, not just by a little bit, but by, daylight. And he's able to just run them off their feet after that, kind of making them come off the bridle to chase him. When he's unable to do that, does he really have an advantage over these other turf sprinters? Not really. I think the evidence of this race shows that. Yeah, he got a little bit rank afterwards, and maybe some people would argue that Irad Ortiz should have just given him his head and allowed him to run up past those leaders, but that's not always the best plan with a horse like this. I mean, we saw that happen at Ascot. Obviously, that was a much worse break from the start, and he had more ground to make up that day, but we've seen that happen in some of his other European races where he's had to do too much in the early going and then doesn't have that finish afterwards. So you don't always want to let this kind of horse do too much in the opening quarter mile. So I don't want to be too hard on Irad for the ride that he gave. It just seemed like he didn't break that sharply, and that's a little bit concerning for me moving forward. Maybe he was a little rusty coming back from Europe. There wasn't that long of a layoff after that trip to Royal Ascot, but I think his next race is going to be pivotal, Craig. I mean, they'll probably run him one more time before the Breeders' Cup. There was some crazy talk they might run him on the dirt. I would hope those plans are dashed now. Yeah, I'll be interested to see if he's able to regain that start reaction time in his next race.
It's a good point to make because he's a horse who's going to be 1 to 5 or 2 to 5 every time he runs. So if you're going to nitpick a performance, these are the kind of horses you want to nitpick because you want to take a shot against them. It depends who shows up, but True Valor, he's a good solid horse, but it's not like he's one that is going to be favored in a Breeders' Cup or even one of the contenders or anything like that. So hopefully for Golden Pal, it was just he wasn't quite ready to deliver a top performance coming back from England. We'll see. It doesn't hurt to nitpick. This was a race where not only did he not break well, the pace was slow. We have the early fraction in blue. It was only a 108 pace figure. And we're talking about a horse in Golden Pal that ran a 154 early pace figure in the Breeders' Cup when he rocketed out to that big lead in just a few strides. So something worth keeping an eye on for sure.
It did run another graded stakes on the turf on Friday. That was the National Museum of Racing Hall of Fame Stakes, a grade 2 event for the 3-year-olds going a mile. And, just want to highlight a horse that actually ran pretty well to win this race, ready to perform for Brad Cox, a horse who had previously been a closing type, but showed surprising early speed here under Joao Rosario. It seemed like that was the plan because he came out riding this horse very aggressively to get the front end. Not so much the case with Irad on Chanceau, who was expected to be the leader, and once ready to perform, got to the front. There was just nobody that could catch him.
I think we have to give a tip of the cap to Joao Rosario for this race and for many others. He's up to having won 10 graded stakes at the meet, which is pretty unheard of. I mean, as you said, we're not even halfway through the meet yet, and he is completely dominating the stakes races. And he did it with crafty rides like this one, where he just took a horse who showed no speed in the past or very little tactical speed. He was shown near the very back of the pace projector. And when he sensed the pace wasn't much, he just went on with it, took the lead, and opened up too. It wasn't like he was content just because he was on the lead. He didn't try to choke it down and back everybody up in a 50 half. They went pretty quick. He opened up on the turn and had plenty left to hold off Witt, who I thought also ran pretty well in his first turf appearance, but ready to perform was much the best.
Yeah, I don't have the information in front of me, but I would love to look up Joao Rosario's ROI in these graded stakes at Saratoga, because even though he's won a lot of them, they have not been with short prices. They've been horses that have not been favored, kind of like Ready to Perform in this race. Who just clearly this was the intention to get some more speed out of him, and it worked to a charm as he was able to make the lead here. The pace wasn't that fast, and nobody could catch them. Yeah, Witt ran fine to be second, clearly handled the turf, just ran into a horse that got the right kind of trip and was ready to perform on the day.
Yeah, I should mention, I don't think I did. He ran a 114 speed figure, which is what about what he had been running coming in, but he was just able to open up on the field and get that head start on the others, and they weren't able to run him down. I guess the real disappointment here had to be Tiz the Bomb, who went off the 5-2 or so morning or favorite. I think he was not the morning line favorite, but he was the wound up going off the favorite off just a terrible running line in the Belmont Derby and just didn't really do much running at all. So not sure what the story is with him. He was the closest to ready to perform early, so maybe it was taking him out of his comfort zone a little bit, but he just had nothing left in the stretch.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We should mention the one other stakes they ran this past week at Saratoga, Craig. That was the Alidar restricted stakes. I believe that was on Thursday. Not a whole lot of drama to this one, as Art Collector was sent off as the heavy favorite and basically did what he was expected to do coming back from the layoff.
Yes, nothing really to see here. Kind of a funny story. I was telling a friend of mine, I just, for whatever reason, I needed a nap that day. I just had one of those where my eyes got heavy and I left the TV on because I wanted to hear the Art Collector race. And I kind of heard his name as I was woken up from a sleep, and I looked up and I saw the half and 49-1, and I said, "Yep, that's over." And I went right back to sleep. I didn't even see the end of the race. It's a totally true story. And I got up later, watched it, saw the chart. He wound up with a 118 speed figure, solid performance off the bench, and I think from what I understand, I may get to see him here in a couple weeks when I'm at the Charlestown Classic. I know he won it last year, and it's possibly in his future again.
Yeah, that would make sense to take the same path as last year. I don't think he's going to be the kind of horse that we're talking about as a major contender come Breeders' Cup Classic time. That division just seems too tough this year. But he can definitely clean up in some of these mid-level Grade 2 stakes races, Grade 3 stakes races between now and the end of the year. So I think that will be a good spot for him next time out. And just want to circle back to what we were talking about before, Craig, because I just went into our DRF internal system to look up some stats. Joel Rosario in graded stakes at this Saratoga meet is 10 for 18 with a $6.50 ROI. So kind of crazy stat there. It's extremely impressive.
Yeah, and he is the reigning Eclipse winner, so it's not a surprise he's winning big races. But I would have to wonder if 10 isn't close to a record already for graded stakes. Now, they probably have more graded stakes now than they ran in the past, but there's just so many more to go. You have to wonder how many he's going to wind up with.
Before we move away from Saratoga, let's just mention a few 2-year-old performances from this past week that earned some decent speed figures. One of those was on Saturday, one of many 7-furlong dirt races they ran that day. The 6th race won by the Steve Asmussen trained second-time starter Disarm, a son of Gunrunner. There were some first-time starters in this race that were rumored to have ability, but experience is often key in these 7-furlong events, and this one just took a big step forward off his debut at Churchill.
It's often the MO for Steve Asmussen to not really have his races fully cranked. Not every time. You can't always dismiss his first timers, but this seemed to be one of them, as he was kind of lukewarm that day, but he took more action this time. He'd obviously been working well. The race had a pretty quick pace. He was able to rate just off of it and ran a nice speed figure. He drew away through the stretch, winning by many lengths. I don't have it in front of me. It was at least 5. Wound up with a 102 speed figure. So another solid 2-year-old that we've seen at the meet. And I know we've talked about it a few times. You have to watch these maiden races. They're often better than the early stakes we see at Saratoga, and this was probably one of them.
Yeah, I know there's some discussion about this horse maybe being one of the key contenders for the hopeful later in the meet. He's probably gonna have to run a little bit faster to be considered a hopeful winner. But this was a nice step in the right direction for him. Got the 7-furlong distance. Seems like the kind of horse that's bred to go even farther down the line. So definitely a nice performance from Disarm. And we should mention the 3rd place finisher Krupe, who ran kind of a strange race. I was under the impression that this was the lesser half of the Todd Pletcher trained entry, the one who had not trained quite as forwardly coming in here. And it seemed like that was playing out as expected in the early stages of the race, as he was way, way back under a ride, doing no running. But it's like the light bulb went on at the quarter pole as he just suddenly seized the bit and ran past almost everybody in the field except Disarm, just missing getting up for second. This horse was flying across the wire.
He was. It will be interesting to see. I would imagine we're going to see him run a little longer next time. I do wonder how much of it's a little bit of an illusion. It did have a pretty quick pace. We have both early fractions in red, but he was running at the end, no doubt. I don't think it was just the pace in this case. He had some trouble at the start, didn't really get going. So I don't think it was totally an illusion how fast he was closing.
Earlier in the day on that Saturday card, we saw Battle of Normandy win the first race of the day, a mile and the 16th turf event, beating the Joseph O'Brien trained Alexis Zorba, a horse that had come over with a reputation, had disappointed going 5.5 in his first start over in the United States. Did a little better on Saturday, but not quite as good as the first-time starter for Shug McGahee, Battle of Normandy, who seems like one that could have a future.
Oh, no doubt about it. I thought he ran really well first time out. We've talked about it. We don't see Shug McGahee win a lot first time out, but when his horses do win first time out, they usually have some talent. This one ran a 99 speed figure. I thought the pace was pretty moderate in here, even though we don't have it coded in blue. There wasn't a whole lot of pace going on up front, and he was just able to run by him. And from the top of the stretch home, always looked like he was going to be the winner.
Yeah, this is a horse that had trained really well prior to his debut, had worked favorably with a couple of older horses on the turf for Shimigeki. Was kind of surprised he didn't go favored in this race. I think some of that was due to the fact that Shug named Kendrick Carmouche aboard, which I guess isn't considered one of his go-to riders or a jock that takes a lot of money during the Saratoga meet, but didn't matter. This horse was ready to fire and ran a nice race for a trainer that usually gets horses to perform a little better after they have some experience under their belt. One more performance to mention among the 2-year-olds at Saratoga this past week was on Sunday's card. Another one of these mile and a 16th turf races. This one for the fillies was won by Pink Hugh for the Chad Brown barn. A race that came up pretty fast, Craig. I know there were a lot of first-time starters involved, so maybe tough to have a lot of confidence in the speed figure, but there were some gaps at the end, so it certainly seemed like Pink Hugh ran a big race.
Yeah, this was a tougher one to make a speed figure, so I don't have total confidence in this one. I think it was the only route on the surface that day. I wound up settling on a 102. It wouldn't surprise me if this was actually a faster race. In these kind of situations, I usually play it a little bit conservative when I'm not sure what to do with it, but I liked everything I saw from her. She's out of Mendelssohn by a Spadestown mare, so obviously bred very well and looked like a total pro out there for a first-time starting 2-year-old.
Yeah, you could just see she was really motoring through the stretch. She kind of has that higher head carriage, which you don't often associate with a horse that's going to love the turf, but she was clearly taking to the surface well and was just rocketing away from this field in the late stages. Like I said, there were some real gaps between the runners towards the end. I think the 4th place finisher, who didn't even run that badly, was beaten over 8 lengths in this race. The 3rd place finisher, Delight, had already shown some talent in her first start for Jonathan Thomas. So yeah, I would not be surprised if this speed figure is right on the money. I think it was a 101 or 102 that you gave the winner of this race. That's a nice number for a 2-year-old debuting over a route distance on the turf. That wraps up the Saratoga action. Let's talk about a few more races on this podcast at other venues. The Grade 3 West Virginia Derby was run at Mountaineer on Saturday. Unfortunately, they got some rain. This race had to be contested over a sloppy track. But aside from that sloppy track, Craig, the top 2 finishers looked just like they did coming down the stretch in the Belmont Stakes. The only difference was there weren't 2 Todd Pletcher Mike Rapoli runners leading them home.
I remember when we did our preview for this race, we kind of highlighted those two both together. And yep, that's how they looked once again here. And these two were much the best. I don't have an official figure for any of the last 3 races we are going to talk about. These are all race tracks that my assistant does. But looking at the worksheet, this is going to come back a pretty darn fast race. I would guess right around the 128 or so. I could be a little high. I really don't know for sure. But when you look at the previous race, or the good older horse Folsom was able to win pretty easily. He's not a horse who's going to be threatening to win any grade 1s anytime soon, but he's a horse who consistently runs in the mid-teens when he runs his best races, maybe even a little higher. And this race was substantially faster than that one. So unless it would appear that the track changed later on in the card and there were only 2 more races to go, and it didn't look like that at a glance to me, this was a pretty darn quick race.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask that question because I was, as you were saying, comparing those 2 route races towards the end of the day, and there's no question that the West Virginia Derby came up very favorably compared to that older horse stakes race just before it. And, you know, when you look at this race and watch the replay, it kind of tracks with that idea that the speed figure is going to be high because there were some pretty big gaps at the end. I mean, Simplification, who was a nice horse, was beaten 6 lengths. Homebrew, who I know you thought was a little interesting as an up-and-coming Brad Cox trainee, he was beaten 14 lengths in 4th. I mean, so there were some horses who had already run fast that were up the track in this race. And Skippy Longstocking and We the People, both coming out of that Belmont Stakes. And, you know, I was looking up the buyer number. They did not assign a number to this race either quite yet. I think they're probably reviewing some things, as I'm sure your assistant is. But, you know, you had that Belmont Stakes figure very high, Craig, compared to some others, including Buyer. And horses are running back to the number you gave them, if not surpassing it. I mean, it seems like that Belmont Stakes was indeed a fast race. We've seen Nest come out of it to run a big speed figure, and now both Skippy Longstocking and We the People taking a step forward out of that race. So, I mean, I know that Mo Donegal won't be in action for a while, having come out of it with an injury, but it seemed like that might have been a pretty strong race.
No doubt, it did seem strong, and these two really separated themselves from the field. Unfortunately, the sloppy track, as you mentioned, will distort things a little bit, or at least put some question marks around the race. But I glanced at the worksheet while you were talking. The ninth race looked about the same exact speed as I had the sixth race, which was another sprint, the sixth race projection. So it's probably no way around it. It's going to be a quick race on the TimeformUS Speed Figures.
Yeah, and I saw a headline on DRF this morning that Skippy Longstocking is probably pointing towards the Travers, and boy, that just adds another wrinkle to a race that's already looking very intriguing. Obviously, with Epicenter coming out of the Jim Dandy, Cyberknife and Taba from the Haskell, Charge It waiting in the wings out of that Dwyer with that gigantic speed figure that he ran. And I mean, Skippy Longstocking, I'm sure there are some others that I haven't even thought about. Rich Strike, who is going to try to recapture that Derby magic in the Travers. That's coming up as a really intriguing race, and probably it's going to be one of the highlights of the Saratoga meet.
Yeah, and I just want to give props to Skippy Longstocking. He's a horse who we basically see every month. So I always like these horses who keep showing up, keep running. He ran on New Year's Day. I think this was already his eighth start, maybe seventh or eighth, and just not something we see a lot of. So he's obviously a tough, sturdy horse.
Let's talk about a couple more races from two other venues. The feature race at Del Mar this past week was the Grade 1 Clement L. Hirsch on Saturday. This one, a bit of an upset, as Blue Stripe got the job done here, I believe achieving her second graded stakes victory in the United States. She dares the devil, Craig. I mean, we've seen this from her before. She was bet down to be the 4-5 favorite here. Seemed like she had this race gift wrapped for her, and she just throws in a clunker that's hard to explain.
Yeah, I've mentioned her before. I can never wrap my head around when she's going to show up and when she's not. And to me, it looked like she was never really traveling all that great. She was tracking Bob Baffert's Private Mission, who wasn't running particularly well. In my eyes, she came in not very good form, and it just looked like Blue Stripe was a winner every step of the way. She seemed to have their measure. I thought Desert Dawn put in a decent race for second, and this is another one that's going to be a pretty quick race. I would guess Blue Stripe's going to get around a 120 speed figure, so solid enough effort from her. It's the third time we've seen her since last year's Breeders' Cup, and she's now won 2 out of 3, but this was her best effort yet.
Yeah, this was a big step forward for the winner. She is the younger half-sister to Blue Prize, that horse that did upset the Breeders' Cup Distaff maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Hasn't quite lived up to that one's lofty achievements yet, but she's on her way there now with these 2 graded stakes victories. So definitely a horse that's moving in the right direction. And props to the 3-year-old filly, Desert Dawn, who finished second in this race. She was that upset third-place finisher in the Kentucky Oaks from earlier this year, and nice to see her kind of validate that form, getting back on track against the older horses in this Clement L. Hirsch.
Yeah, she definitely has some talent. She's a horse who completely blew the break last time when she was the favorite in the summertime. I forget. Yeah, Summertime Oaks, I think it's called, at Santa Anita. But she showed that those races were no fluke. She's just back in form, and they don't have 3-year-old only races, so they took a shot against older and certainly weren't disgraced.
One more race to discuss on this Pacecast that's going down to New Jersey, Monmouth Park, where their feature race on Saturday was the Jersey Shore Stakes for the 3-year-olds going 6 furlongs. They assembled a pretty nice field for this listed stakes race, Craig, and I thought the winner, Provocateur, ran very well. I didn't see the speed figure yet, so maybe I'm talking up a race that came up slow, but he felt like a horse that put in a nice performance relative to the pace.
Now, I would have nixed it if it was slow. I wouldn't hang out like that. Provocateur, again, it's not one I'm going to do, but it looks pretty easy to make. I would guess he's going to get around a 117 speed figure. So an improvement over what we saw from him last time when he was in the Woody Stevens, ran a decent third that day, got a 114. And yeah, good solid effort from him. I didn't know a whole lot of horses when I looked at the top three in the race, but I see Lightning Larry was further down and was the one he was actually engaged with early. That one had run a big race at Churchill on Derby week, but didn't quite have it this day, and Provocateur was able to win it pretty easily in fast time.
Yeah, I mean, Provocateur has been in great form ever since the wintertime for Todd Pletcher. His only performance where he was not competitive was clearly that Woody Stevens, where he was no match for Jack Christopher, as few three-year-olds would have been that day. But wonder what they're going to do with him off this performance. You would think maybe he's earned his way back into a race like the Grade 1 Alan Jerkins, or they might not want to go that route because that's probably going to come up a pretty tough spot. But this was a nice step forward for him if he, getting that 117 TimeformUS Speed Figure, because it felt like the pace was on the honest side, and he made an early move up the rail to take over at about the 3/8 pole and held on pretty well through the stretch. I do want to give a shout out to the second place finisher Whitty, who, if you watch the start of this race, just completely blew the break. He broke about 3 lengths behind the field, and yes, he got pace to close into, but still put in a nice run to pass 7 runners to get up into second.
It was a good effort. And he's a horse who had run a big speed figure at Laurel earlier this year, then tried the turf for some reason, didn't run particularly well in that. But he is one who's shown some talent worth watching with a cleaner break.
Yeah, I believe he's the younger half-brother to Caravel, so maybe that's why they tried the turf, but clearly he's more of a dirt horse, and getting back to sprinting on the dirt certainly worked for him here. He put in a nice effort to be second for young trader McLean Hendricks. Well, that is all the racing to recap from this past week, Craig. Always something to look forward to at this time of the year. The big race coming up on Saturday this week is the 4-Star Dave. I don't know if we're going to talk about that or maybe something at Del Mar. So we'll have to look at that, but we'll figure something out to do on the forecast later in the week.
Yeah, sounds good to me. I'm always game for whatever. It makes speed figures for a lot of these tracks, so I'm pretty versatile that way.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for listening, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up later in the week.